Morning.
Hope everybody's well today. So I'm going to call the meeting to order, the March 19th workshop agenda for the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, Mr. Merrill. I didn't have to. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. The first item on the workshop agenda this morning is a discussion about the I-495 Express Lanes Northern Extension Project, also referred to as 495 Next. I remember cutting the ribbon, or groundbreaking the shovel, I guess we did, in a very chilly morning at 8 a.m. up in Northern Virginia. Now almost a year and a few months. Yeah, a bit of a time ago, and it was a great day. So looking forward to hearing about where we are. Ms. Shropshire.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Shropshire. I'm the Acting Mega Projects Director for Northern Virginia, and today I'll be presenting information regarding an interstate agreement between the Maryland Department of Transportation and VDOT regarding some work that needs to be accomplished for the 495 Next project in Maryland. Just as a little bit of a reminder, the 495 Express Lanes Northern Extension Project, or 495 Next as we call it, is a 2.5-mile extension of the express lanes from the Dulles Corridor Interchange to the George Washington Memorial Parkway near the American Legion Bridge. The project is a public-private partnership with our partners Transurban, and the concession period runs through 2087. The new express lanes will operate the same as the existing express lanes operate today. There'll be 2 express lanes in each direction. As the Secretary just mentioned, we are celebrating this month the 2-year construction anniversary of the project. Service commencement is on schedule for December of 2025, and project completion is scheduled for May of 2026.
Ms. Shropshire, can I interject for a moment, please?
Yes.
So most of y'all will remember, some of y'all remember, but some of you are not here, that this is a part of a project that's been going on for some period of time in terms of trying to get the express lanes extended in Virginia, but also to connect with express lanes that were to be built in Maryland and to resolve the American Legion Bridge issue that we have there, or at least ameliorate the issue. And as some of y'all know, and others may or may not know, as we were progressing our project, Maryland's project stopped and changed. And they were working with a P3 concessionaire that had done our project on our side as well. And so the intent was to sort of join those up and to go forward. When they stopped their project on their side, that didn't impact us in terms of us continuing. And so we've continued on with our project, and they're reworking theirs currently in Maryland to see exactly what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And that's not been released yet. They're still operating under an old record of decision. And depending on what they want to do going forward, it may require a new one or may not. It just depends on what they end up with. So we're not exactly sure. In the interim, of course, as this was going to be different than it is today, meaning there was going to be stuff going on the other side that would join up properly. We're not joining up. We're stopping at the George Washington Parkway, as has been indicated. But in order to operate ours appropriately with lanes and express lanes and so forth and so on, we need to have signage in Maryland. So as people are approaching our express lanes, they understand what to do and how it works. And so really this presentation is about that. It's about our cooperation with Maryland to get the things that we need in Maryland done so that our lanes will work appropriately and properly when folks get to Virginia. And then hopefully, in the future, as Maryland comes to progress their end of the project, those two will link up, and this will all be relatively a seamless passing across the ALB from one state to the other. So that's sort of the background of this. That's why we're even talking about this today in terms of this. And so I just want to make sure all the members are sort of up to speed, because we who delve in it every day are a little different than these folks. And some of them weren't here when it started. So thank you, Ms. Shropshire.
Thank
You'll
you.
continue.
All right, so I'll continue. The 495 Next project does require 6 sign structures to be constructed in Maryland for our project. It also includes conduits and some communication fibers to support those signs for the express lanes and some general guide signs for interstate exits. There's a total of 9 guide signs and 2 dynamic message signs that will be constructed as part of the project. The agreement defines the duties and responsibilities of both VDOT and Maryland in the agreement, and it defines the maintenance and operations responsibilities as well. Our project concessionaire, Capital Beltway Express, is responsible for financing and constructing these signs as part of the 495 Next project. The agreement, although it's just for 6 signs, does have 6 different parts and 4 appendices. So we'll work through those very quickly here in the presentation so that you have just a good summary of those for your consideration. It was included in your agenda package. The first part, Part A, just has general descriptions of the work that will be performed and the obligations of both VDOT and Maryland. It describes the different phases of work to be accomplished, and it identifies that VDOT is responsible for all of the environmental and NEPA approvals, which we have those underway at this time. Part of Part A also has Section 7, which is an acknowledgement of the ongoing collaboration between the 2 states, Virginia and Maryland, in relation to some of the remarks that the Secretary made about the 495 Next project and Maryland's American Legion Bridge and 270 Corridor project. It makes mention of the tolling and operational independency that is needed between those 2 projects, and it captures the intent for the 2 states to, in the future, enter into a bi-state agreement. Specific language for the agreement relative to the signs is also included for Maryland to reserve rights for future relocation of utilities by referencing language in their utilities manual. Part B references right-of-way and access. At this time, we do not anticipate any need for any additional right-of-way in Maryland, as all of the sign structures are within the Maryland right-of-way, but it does capture some of the processes should additional right-of-way be needed. It also has language providing responsibility for Maryland to give us access to their right-of-way for the construction of the signs and conduits needed, and not to interfere with our work except if there are compliance issues with our permitting or if there's a safety or an emergency. Part C of the agreement has details specific to the construction and design, such as what standards we'll be using, review timeframes, schedule coordination. It also outlines VDOT's responsibility to obtain governmental approvals as we're coordinating with the National Park Service and the Army Corps of Engineers. Both of those things are underway at this time as well. It also outlines in Part C that our concession partner will be installing these signs and infrastructure in Maryland. Part D refers to inspection and maintenance of the signs once they have been installed. Long-term maintenance and inspection responsibility will lie with Maryland for 2 of the sign structures, and those 2 signs relate to the general interstate guide signs for the general exits. The remaining sign structures will be the responsibility of Virginia as they relate to the express lanes. Maryland also has responsibility or can have oversight for maintenance and inspection as we construct those signs. And then finally, the last two parts have some language about the cost and just some general language about insurance responsibilities. The approximate cost for this work is approximately $6.2 million, and that, again, is covered by the 495 Next project. And the insurance responsibilities, that is covered through the concession agreement, the comprehensive agreement that we have for the 495 Next project. And finally, next steps. As mentioned, we are presenting this agreement for your consideration today. Next month in April, we'll be making a recommendation to this board for the approval of the interstate agreement related to the signs. And we'll also be seeking this board's approval for the commissioner to have delegated authority to execute that agreement. And that concludes the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Smoot.
Michelle, you talk in the slides in a number of places about maintenance of the signs and erecting the signs. Who is responsible, or do you address who is responsible for operating the signs?
We will be operating the express lane, the signs that are relative to the express lanes.
Okay, so we have the authority to do that within the agreement or other agreements?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is it's a well-needed project in that part of the world, and we're just hopeful that we can, that Maryland can find a way to do the work on their side, because until the bridge is improved and the other side's improved, it will continue to be a bottleneck. And this improves, this whole project on our side improves our side, if you will, and we get a host of advantages out of it, but it's not the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution is to get across the bridge and to get into Maryland and to get their side improved as well, so. Mr. Stant.
Not germane to this particular project, but they just completed a significant express lane project in Hampton Roads that I've driven on repeatedly, and it's absolutely amazing what that project has done to the congestion between Bowers Hill and Points West. It's unbelievably well managed, well built, and well everything.
Yeah. So, well, I appreciate your sending that email of thanks to the staff as well after you did some driving on it, and I would concur with you after doing the same thing. So it's nice to see that, the impact there. Anyone else? All right, thank you. The next item on the agenda is a State Trails Office update. Ms. Angel Dean. Good morning, ma'am. Hope you're well today.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So I'm here this morning to provide a State Trails Office update as requested. I'm happy to do so. So first, I wanted to provide some background, just by way of reminder and perhaps new information for some newer board members. The State Trails Office was established at VDOT by the General Assembly in June of 2022. The directives included what you see listed here, the development of a state trails plan, the development of a state trails information clearinghouse. It also prescribes specific coordination with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, as well as the State Trails Advisory Committee. And it mentioned development of what we're terming 5 specific priority trails. So VDOT stood up the office and began outreach efforts in late 2022. And in terms of funding, the General Assembly allocated $89 million in general fund dollars for the work of the office. They specifically called out $800,000 to be used to support initial office operational overhead costs and to develop the state trails plan and that information clearinghouse. So this board in October of 2022 allocated $1 million to each of the 5 priority trails to assist with scoping and estimate development. And then fast forward to the FY24 budget language. The General Assembly specifically prescribed amounts to be allocated to those 5 priority trails. And then this board allocated those funds in December of 2023. So there remains $29.2 million available for distribution out of that $89 million that was provided. So next, I'd like to provide a recap of the work of the office. They've been very busy over the last year. We have the engagement statistics you see listed up on the slide that I think are fairly impressive given how new the office is. We completed a statewide survey. You can see the survey responses listed there. We hosted 3 virtual town halls and 5 focus groups. So all part of extensive public outreach to inform that statewide trails plan. So we heard from folks all across the state. We're able to provide input to them regarding multi-use trails and answer their questions. I would note that the focus groups, we intentionally engaged those that identified as current trail users, as well as those that said they were non-trail users and trail advocates to make sure we had a balanced perspective. We created a State Trails Plan Advisory Committee with very diverse representation, and of course continue that communication and coordination across state agencies, working very closely again with Department of Conservation and Recreation. I'd also note that over the last year, the State Trails Office has participated in numerous opportunities where they've been invited to speak at various workshops, conferences, and other meetings. And we've said yes to that on numerous occasions. So lots of great efforts over the last year. Next, I want to focus on the statewide trails plan, because again, that's
Mr. Secretary
Yes, sir, Mr. Lawson.
Lawson, quick question. Did focus groups, you said current trail users, are you also talking with rail users or potential rail users as part of this data and planning efforts gathering?
I would answer that by saying no for the statewide trails plan, because it is a trails plan, so we're trying to get at the needs and considerations of those that use trails, those that might have an opinion that don't use trails, et cetera.
I mean, I understood, just to pick on one that I'm familiar with, Shenandoah Valley Rail Trail. That's
We'll speak about
two
that.
things. Okay.
Sure.
So
So
the-
the priority trails, if I may, Mr. Lawson, the
Thank you.
priority trails are somewhat separate and distinct from the statewide trails plan. Some of them will qualify as regional multi-use trails that will be reflected in the statewide trails plan, some will not. So I think I'll get at your
Thank you.
question a little later. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Dean.
Okay, so the statewide trails plan, again, a primary directive of the office is compilation of this trail and maintenance of it of this plan, and maintenance of it over time. What you see on the slide is a flyer that we use to reach out to folks and ask them to engage in those various opportunities that I just referenced. So we worked closely with localities, PDCs, and other entities to collect trails data. We have created the first statewide multi-use trails map with that information that we collected from all of those sources. And as a result of that, we've mapped 3,000 planned trail miles and 1,510 existing trail miles. Again, these are multi-use trails. So this was a very extensive undertaking, but one that certainly was important for a baseline for the state trails plan.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes, Ms. Hines.
prompted by your response to Mr. Lawson, Ms. Dean, can you tell us what the criteria are for whether something that currently exists is considered appropriate to be in the state trail plan? What are the criteria that you're using?
Sure. Regionally, trails that are regionally connected, that provide a surface that supports a variety of trail uses. So for those that walk or roll, if you will, are safe and accessible.
So there's no minimum width that has to be provided?
Not at this time. no.
Okay, and no like lane markings for going bidirectionally, so that.
As this plan evolves, Ms. Hines, we do intend to start working on standards that would be appropriate in various contexts.
Okay, great,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay?
We're still crawling.
I totally understand, because we've been working on this in Northern Virginia for about 6 years, trying to catalog what we have and who owns it and who's maintaining it, and it's not a simple, straightforward.
It's a patchwork, isn't it?
It is, and it depends on, we have some trails in, the Mount Vernon Trail's really old, right? And we have some really new ones, so it just depends.
Thank you, Ms. Dean.
So in addition to the mapping that will be presented as a result of the inventory efforts that we just discussed, the plan will also look at some best practices, funding opportunities, as well as needs assessments for regional multi-use trails. So as a result of that effort, we'll be able to identify key gaps in Virginia's network of multi-use trails and suggest additional opportunities for further engagement to refine that. So now I'll turn to the Information Clearinghouse Directive that we were provided. We've come to term this the Resource Hub. We think that maybe is more relatable to folks. This is intended to be a publicly available resource for trails information in Virginia. So that trails mapping that I just spoke of will be a part of this Resource Hub, but not all of it. So the Resource Hub is an opportunity to start bringing in other trail types. So you think about footpaths, or trails in parks, hiking-only trails, those sorts of things will come together in this resource hub. If I did not mention, I think I just realized I didn't mention the State Trails Plan will be released in April, so next month. The resource hub, the continued work on that will have us release the initial version of the resource hub at the end of this year in December. So as part of the Resource Hub work, we'll continue collecting data on those trail types. We'll standardize trail attributes or characteristics across trail types. So we'll engage with our partners to ensure we can facilitate data sharing for the Resource Hub and ask for things like width and surface type, grade, slope, length, et cetera, to integrate all of that information. So the culmination of that will be an interactive mapping interface of trails in the Commonwealth.
And let me be clear about the third point when it says standardized trail attributes or characteristics. That doesn't mean that we approach each trail and look at it the same way. It doesn't mean that at all. We may have, as Ms. Deem said, you may have a very different kind of trail one place than another. But where they're like, we'd like to have some standards that we can sort of coalesce around. And so, we have trails that are co-located on highways and trails that are, more like paths, and trails that some people want to put a train on as well, and places that are urban and places that are very rural. And so they're not all going to look the same. They're not going to be built the same. They're not going to have the same stuff. But within those subsets, we hope to have some standardization and some standards, some attributes that would be similar. That's the concept.
Thank you. And I'll just add on to that here, in terms of the Resource Hub, we just want to ensure we have a common denominator in terms of information for trails that are presented on the Resource Hub. But the Secretary's right, as the statewide trails plan evolves, we do intend to do that important and tough work of providing a suite of standards that folks can reference and use for development purposes. Okay? So now on to the General Assembly priority trails, as we term those. So this is a slide this board has seen before. This shows you the distribution of those 5 trails across the Commonwealth. They range from 2 miles in length to over 48 miles in length. And again, work has been underway over the last year. In some cases, We took a look at existing scope and cost estimates and refined those. In other cases, we had to develop that information, and there have been iterations along the way for those. So I will move now to our proposed funding, which you'll see in your packet for program transfers. They'll be reflective of what I'm going to review next. First, I'd like to orient you to the table, if I may, because it's a lot of information packed into one slide. So first, the trails, their estimates have been done in ranges, which is appropriate for this concept level development, but the estimated total costs that are presented are the upper end of that range. The advanced activity funding is, again, that October 2022 distribution that this board made, and then the FY24 budget amendment, again, is that December 2023 distribution. Other confirmed funding, what is meant there, some trails enjoy additional funding sources coming from federal discretionary grants or congressionally designated spending or earmarks, and some have smart scale funding. So that's what you see reflected in that column. And then the recommended column is what we're recommending just today for additional distribution by this board. And then, of course, a balance to complete where appropriate and the status of the trail. So I'll start with, at the top, with the 2-mile Tobacco Heritage Trail. This trail is proposed as a crushed aggregate surface. It is along an abandoned Norfolk Southern rail corridor, so there's minimal earthwork involved, comparably lower land disturbance and stormwater management costs along its flat grade. So with the total estimated cost, again, at the high end of $4 million, we're recommending the additional allocation of $1.75 million to fully fund this trail and move it to final design, right-of-way acquisition, and construction. In contrast, the 2-mile or 2.2-mile Peaks to Creeks Trail is its estimated total cost at the high end, again, is $15 million. So you might ask why the difference between these two trails that seem comparable in terms of length. They are quite different. Peaks to Creeks involves extensive earthwork. It incorporates retaining walls and structures as it crosses Ivy Creek in several points. It meanders and follows Ivy Creek. This trail connects existing Ivy Creek and Peaks View parks in the city of Lynchburg. It is along primarily city-owned property, and so we would anticipate the city to maintain and operate this trail. In terms of cost influences, it also assumes an asphalt surface, which is consistent with the trails with which it connects on either end, and it incorporates things like handrails along some of the steep slopes that the trail traverses. So in order to fully fund this trail and, again, allow it to proceed to final design, right-of-way acquisition, and construction, we're recommending the $12.75 million necessary.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, Ms. Hines.
Just a quick question. Ms. Deem, do either of these fit into the trail map that you discussed earlier?
The tobacco, yes, Ms. Hines. Tobacco Heritage is part of a much larger trail system that's definitely a regional multi-use trail. This is just a small piece, so certainly Peaks to Creeks in that it connects with 2 existing trail networks across the city. I believe it does qualify as a regional trail.
You would just mention that as you go on the other 3. I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, sir, Mr. Gasports.
Angel, in the estimated total cost column, is the standard that's being applied to come up with those estimates a 10-foot paved trail continuously along the right-of-way?
It varies.
It varies.
It varies based on the trail's context and the expectation. Some of these are existing plans, if you will, so we tried to stay true to what those plans have been for the trail.
I mean, it's just obvious on 2 of them anyway that we're $1.5 million to $2 million per mile. I'm assuming that includes parking facilities as well on that number?
So for Peaks to Creeks, yes, there are attributes, amenities associated with it. For Tobacco Heritage, I don't believe it does not include any of those amenities. as it connects to, a larger trail network, or has the potential to.
Ms. Kasperitz, let me take you back about 8 or 9 years or so.
I'd like to do that. Thank you, sir.
Good point. I mean it quite that way, but it's a good idea.
I understand, sir.
I'm with you. Can I go with you? One of the things that we're grappling with in general is, cost increases and everything's so expensive, and everywhere I turn, it just seems like it's, too much. And I'm not talking about trails, I'm talking about everything. Some 8 or 9 years ago, I think that's about right. When I was a member of the board previously, we were funding the trail around down Route 5 in James City County, I think it was. And it was finishing up that trail, which is a beautiful trail, by the way. And Commissioner, I think we said it was over $1 million a mile back then to do that trail. And I was like, $1 million. And I'm thinking like, sort of an aggregate bicycle, like $1 million. And so we talked about it a fair amount. We got into ADA and we got into this and we got into that. And there's no question that we sort of start from a standpoint in our business of doing things really solid, doing things really right, designing and building them for the long term, making sure they're really safe. And yet, some trails are different than other trails, and they have different attributes. But I continue to be concerned about these costs, and we continue to look for ways to push those costs down by not doing things that might be considered unnecessary, or some people might call them gold-plated or whatever. But I mean, it's a serious exercise, and it's one of the reasons that we didn't just snap our fingers and have all this done and figured out. It's because the costs are really high on a lot of these things, and we're trying to find ways to make sure we provide the value and the safety without having exorbitant costs. So it's definitely something we're struggling with in general in transportation and in society, but certainly we see that in the trails as well. So I hear you. I have the same concern, and I've been pushing folks to try to find ways to get costs down.
And I wonder, as we look at this, if there are progressive approaches that we might take. I had the pleasure of biking the Highbridge Trail in October of last year, and that is a compacted gravel trail that is remarkably easy to navigate on a bike, by foot. Certainly, wheelchairs would even be accessible. And so I'd much rather have more trail miles at the outset and be able to progressively improve them if paving is an improvement over the long haul when we consider a number like $67 million for the Eastern Shore Trail. Perhaps that should start as a packed gravel trail rather than going to the full paved iteration.
Well, and we certainly look at that. In some places, it's more or less appropriate. Some people just don't want that, right? They don't want it at all. They don't want a paved trail. So 100% with you, and we're working hard to
Thank you.
try to push on that.
Chairman,
Yes,
kind
Ms.
of
Sellers.
To expand upon that, some of these trails, as I'm looking at this, I don't hike these trails, but my father is a hiker and a biker. And looking at some of these trails, are these hiking trails or are these biking trails? And some of these are national, not just regional network trails, but this Tobacco Heritage Trail, at the chance that I'm going to go home and have to hear about this national trail that goes to California for the next week. Is this part of this national trail that some of these bike groups start in Virginia Beach and take all the way out to California? And is this, one of those areas where maybe it's not safe? So that would be my questions. And there are parts of the AT here in Virginia that I've heard my father talk about here in Virginia are not safe. And we've talked about it here. There's a place where you have to cross over a busy highway. And I've heard folks up here talk about it. And so I would be interested in that as well, because I know how much he pays to go on these trips. And so these folks who are hiking these and biking these trails spend tons of money out in some very rural areas that, hiking and biking and these outdoor activities are part of the economy for these rural areas. And so while it may look like a lot of money on the Eastern Shore, if it's attracting people along that area, it's very rural out there. And so that may be part of their tourism. So, you know, to Northern Virginia, it may not mean anything, but if you can get people out there using it, and that is a large biking trail. And so they're not going to want a paved path. That is one that my father has done and that he talks about. And I don't know if they would want it to be paved there in Eastern Shore, but I don't know. So just.
Well, we have lots of balancing to do, Ms. Sellers, to your point, and we have limited funds. And so we're trying to bring the best value to the folks that are going to be using this and the taxpayers. So, you know, both pieces are what we're trying to balance all the time.
And if we could see those national trail networks like the AT, that would be interesting to me to see how these connect to those bigger things, to show that it's not just a small network we're tying into. It is these national networks. Because like there's one that runs along Route 1 in Prince William, or out of Northern Virginia and down, and apparently in Pennsylvania, Maryland, that area, it's very well done. And then once you get into Prince William, through Stafford, Fredericksburg, it becomes a little more dicey. So just, that would be interesting as well, but
Ms. Dean?
sorry.
We've received very clear direction from the Secretary to look for opportunities to not build it to the total estimated cost, but to really engage when we get into that final design discussion with the stakeholders for each of these and make sure that we're right-sizing it, so.
Mr. Secretary,
Dr. Smoot?
you are recommending funding for 2 of the trails and not, at this time, and not recommending funding for the other 3. What is the criteria that governs that decision?
Can we finish going through the trails?
Sure.
We'll go through each one and then we'll,
Oh, okay.
I think that'll clean it up because we're still at Eastern Shore, I think, or just moved to Eastern Shore.
We are, yes, sir. So the Eastern Shore Rail Trail, this trail continues to progress, and VDOT is very actively engaged in partnering with the Eastern Shore Rail Trail Foundation as they advance the fairly sizable investments that have been made to date to this trail from a variety of funding sources. This is a trail that enjoys funding from Smart Scale, from a federal earmark, as well as a federal discretionary grant. One of the things that needs to be worked through, to Dr. Smoot's point, is the overlap that currently exists in the termini, the segment termini between the federal discretionary grant that was awarded and the Smart Scale awarded funding that this board allocated. So there's some overlap between those two.
Geographic overlap.
Geographic overlap, yes, sir. So that needs to be worked out, and then I would envision we would come forward with, the recommendation for additional funding to deliver additional segments for this trail. Okay. Regarding the.
We'll come back and sort of sum up what your question is, Dr. Smoot.
No, that's fine.
Regarding the Craig de Botetourt Scenic Trail, this trail too is in progress. We very recently begun some work on clearing to better access the trail corridor as we continue to refine our approach to incremental development of this 26-mile trail. So again, the first 2, the recommended funding will fully fund the entirety of the trail. For the others, we're looking at incremental development. And then finally, for the Shenandoah Valley Rail Trail, as many may be aware, there was a study by Department of Conservation and Recreation that was published in 2021 that valued rail conversion, rail to trail conversion at $120 million. We were directed by the General Assembly to not preclude consideration of rail, so we have initiated a study that will look at just that. So it will provide an alternative that will have the trail and the rail co-located in the corridor. So that work has just begun.
Secretary.
Yes, sir. Mr. Gasperts?
Angel, when will we have that study of the rail trail component?
So we are aggressively moving towards a end of the year, first of next year timeline for that study. It is quite comprehensive.
Good.
So we'll have more details as we have those milestones refined.
So let me try to circle back and tell you what the staff's thinking was. So as indicated, there's some things that we need to work out with Eastern Shore. We think that'll get resolved. Craig Botetourt has a number of bridges, and it's co-located along the highway, and it's complicated. And we're trying to make sure that we're bringing the right value with the expenditure there, and how much bridge repair we have to do, or replacement, sort of what does that really look like. And so, if you tried to gold plate that thing, it would be very expensive. And we're trying to find ways to make it be what it needs to be, given all the bridges that we have there. And a lot of these estimates were early estimates, as as one of my directors is fond to talk about at the end of the table. We shouldn't be putting out a lot of estimates with 0% design and 0% engineering. But in any case, so we're working hard on both of those to resolve those situations. And then, as she told you, the Shenandoah Valley Trail, it has a much more comprehensive look in terms of rail being a part of it or not, and that's going to take some time and some money to work through. And so the thinking was, Dr. Smoot, we know that two of them, we got our hands around them completely. They're relatively small to get done and get completed, and so we wanted to knock those out and move on. Eastern Shore is sort of primed up, and we got a couple things to work through there, and we're working really hard to get the Craig Botetourt fully understood and to value that in a way that makes sense there. And we hope that we'll be through that in the next few months. That's the hope. And Shenandoah Valley is going to trail that a little bit, no pun intended, because of this rail study that we're doing. So it's taken us a little bit longer than we'd like, but that's because we were at zero, and we've got to make sure we do this right. And we have a limited amount of money to do it right. So we want to make sure we leave no stone unturned, and we're sure about everything we're doing. So we're walking slowly. We're moving expeditiously, but we're not running because we don't want to mess it up. And so that's why we're recommending we do it this way, as opposed to just waiting. We know these can get done. We know they can get done reasonably, and so we want to knock them out. Yes, sir. Mr. Merrill.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Steve, in terms of, just make sure I'm clear on the FY24, two questions. On the FY24 budget amendment, that was done by the legislature. So they have now restricted the Trails Office use of these funds. It's earmarked for those particular projects, correct?
Yes, sir. The General Assembly directed this board to allocate those amounts to each of the trails.
And I think what you said, Mr. Secretary, makes sense. I guess the only concern I'd have is if the money gets allocated ahead of time, then the trails that are not allocated the funds, there will not be funds left for them to be recipients. So if
We looked at that, Mr. Merrill, and it's a concern that we shared with you and everyone else. The $14 million we thought was appropriate to get those done, and we can't half do them. So we're either going to do them or we're not. To your point, they have allocated, another $41 million to those three other trails. So we hear you. I heard you. We talked about that a fair amount, but we've pretty much concluded that those we're going to get, these other small ones we're going to get done one way or the other, and we need to just knock them out and move on. But it's a legitimate concern, and we shared and talked about that a lot. We didn't want to wait till next year to start on some of these. And Shenandoah is a big one out there. Craig Botetourt's substantial. And as we move to those next two, I think that's when we're going to get a little bit more, continue to be concerned that we make sure we're allocating this across the 5 trails appropriately. So, yeah, I think we absolutely understand.
And I guess one final question.
Yes, sir.
For the longer trails, which are not, if we were to proceed with the recommendation, is there any possibility that these be done in portions? I mean, because these are pretty long trails. I mean,
Yes.
a 46-mile trail
Yes.
and a 26, to do half of it would still be beneficial.
That's part of the analysis. Yes, sir. absolutely.
And that's how Eastern Shore is tackling it. They're getting funding for discrete segments along that
Right at
corridor.
a time.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes, Dr. Smoot?
who owns these trails?
It varies, sir. So it varies. So in some cases, they're on VDOT or Commonwealth right-of-way. In other cases, like the Peaks to Creeks, it's primarily on city-owned right-of-way, so it varies.
So there's not a requirement about trails in general that the Commonwealth has to own the trail. It could be local government, it could be some
Nonprofit.
other entity. Okay, now where I'm going with this is my second question. Who is responsible for maintaining these trails once they get built?
Various and sundry people.
Well,
State is sometimes it's a nonprofit, sometimes it's a city, sometimes it's basically fall within those three groups. And what you'll see when we finally get out when we get out our census, if you will, you'll see all those trails, how big they are, how long they are, what they're made of, who owns them, who maintains them, and it's a patchwork. And that's part we're trying to get our arms around this. Right?
so when the Commonwealth funds a trail, as we're proposing to do with two here, there is an understanding up front of who's responsible for what with maintaining the trail. They're not going to be calling VDOT, for example, necessarily to come in because there's a landslide and clean it up.
And stated another way, I would say that there's no presumption just because funding comes from a specific source. There's no assumption that then requires the Commonwealth to be engaged in operation and maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
It's definitely a concern
Yeah.
because there's so many fingers in the pie. And we've got, our friends at DCR are in trails as well, right? Conservation and Natural Resources folks. So we've got it in here, we got it in transportation, we have it over there. We have counties, we have cities, we have nonprofit groups, and we're trying to bring all this together, make it comprehensive and make sense of it. Yes, Ms. Sellers?
So on that, my concern is more with the repository and putting it all in one place and the appearance that it's going to bring. Again, my father's a big into trails, and these groups take care of these trails. I'm kind of surprised that some of these organizations want their trails to be put in and advertised in this manner because they do take so much pride in it, and it is a close-knit organizations that do these things. However, this is what we're doing, and the General Assembly has put it out there, and I hope as we go down this path that we consider what I like to refer in the DoD as mission creep and really put some thought into what we're trying to accomplish with this trail program as it grows in the future. What is the intent beyond what's been put in the legislation, but as this office grows, what is the intent and what do we hope to accomplish, and make sure that we adhere to that vision and really stay true to it, because this is Pandora's box. We're going to find there are lots of little trails out there, and if we start creating standards, it's going to be very expensive just to build them, to maintain them. And just because it's right-of-way doesn't mean we own it. It just means you have the right-of-way and the easement and who owns the property and, lots of little things. There are lots of little interesting things that are going to come to bear. So it's interesting, it's kind of exciting, but it's also, I think, very scary and quite a new territory for VDOT. Very interesting to go down, so good luck.
Ms. Sellers, I would note to you that $59 million of the 89, actually $60 million of the 89 has been directed for us. 800,000 to the office, and then the rest to specific trails. Or that's not fair, because the $5 million we allocated. But certainly the $54 million is directed to be spent in certain places. So we share that, we want to make sure it's done right. We're not, we don't want to create a monster here that nobody can sort of get their arms around. And that's one of the reasons that we're not just, that's why we're not running or sprinting. We're walking at a fast pace. And so we hear you.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, Ms. Hines.
So one of the issues that I've had about trails really since I came to this board was we often don't know what the usage is. And I come from a place where where our county put counters in order to understand usage for commuting purposes, in order to allocate resources appropriately. And so I know we're really unusual that way, but it does occur to me that there may be other places where commuting is a primary function of the trail alongside recreation. And the only way we know that is by counting. And so, I believe, Mr. Secretary, it's already in our policy that we put counters. I don't know that we have a standard about how far apart they are or anything, but we do put counters. I know we did it along 66, the 66 West Hot Lanes trails.
Ms. Hines, I would tell you that you are in a unique place, as you
I
often
understand.
say. Having been on a number of these, including the High Bridge Trail that was mentioned, and I wouldn't include Peaks to Creeks here because it's sort of an inner city thing. But some of these are
Right.
are just, they are recreational in their nature. They are not primarily transportation in their nature. And so, yeah, I hear you.
I mean, ours didn't start out being transportation either, Mr. Secretary, many, many years ago.
It's a matter of
So-
density and
It is.
options and
Absolutely.
and speed and everything else.
And younger people liking to ride their bikes to work instead of taking a car. So my only point in bringing this up is where we do have data about counting, I hope it's included, about usage, I hope it's included. And I hope we're somewhat forward-thinking about where we're going to place counters in order to help us understand the need for maintenance or not. And that as we move forward, I think creative agreements between parties about maintenance is really the way to go. In Arlington, the city, we ended up buying little John Deere Caterpillars that had a plow on the front in order to plow our trails because the commuting function was higher than some of our secondary streets. So, but that's over a very long period of time, and I acknowledge that. But I think younger people are making different choices than you or I might have made 25 years ago. So there you have it. I won't be here, so this is the last time. This is the last time you have to listen to me say this, Mr. Secretary.
I'd like to see some counters on some bike lanes. That's what I'd like to see. Because we
think you
keep
might
building them
be
and I don't see anybody in
surprised.
them.
I think you might be surprised.
If you want to come to where I live, Ms. Hines, you'd be very surprised. Because I'm there all day long, every day for years and years and years, and I watched it, and it's like very minimal.
I will say, our experience in Arlington is if the bicyclists don't feel safe, they're not going to ride there, and that once you put the lane in, there's a period of time that's required before people make the shift. So you can't, it's not immediate.
We can have that offline.
We can.
I don't know what immediate is, but 10 years is a little long for me.
Take a bike-
Ms.
take a-
Deem.
Take a bike ride together.
Ms. Deem.
Okay, so to wrap up, distribution of the funds, and it really shouldn't say remaining funds, my apologies there, because there will be remaining funds after this distribution. In your packet for the program transfer report, you have that recommendation for the funding necessary to fully fund construction for Tobacco Heritage and Peaks to Creeks Trail. So with that, I'll conclude my update.
Anyone else? Thank you, Ms. Deem. Appreciate it. Next, we'll turn to Virginia's National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program Awards, NEVI. Mr. Chris Berg.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Great.
Thank you.
Good to have you.
Yes, so I'm Chris Berg, the Director of VDOT's Office of Transportation Sustainability. I'll be providing an update on Virginia's National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program Awards. As a reminder, I last presented to this board last June, just ahead of our initial NEVI program request for applications, which was released last July. I'm here this morning to provide you an update on the results of that request for applications and what's next for the program. So a few review slides here since it's been a little while. The NEVI program was authorized under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act with really a mission to deploy fast electric vehicle charging stations across the country. Virginia will be allocated around $106 million over the life of the program. And the program requires the release of an annual deployment plan, which we have done in 2022 and 2023, and are currently preparing for 2024. So the program operates under some pretty specific federal requirements in its initial phase, which are outlined here. The charging stations themselves built under the program must be located along alternative fuel corridors, which I'll discuss on some future slides, but these are corridors designated, nominated by states, designated by federal highways. During this first phase, there currently are interstate highways. Along those corridors, stations must be located at least every 50 miles. Stations must be no more than 1 mile from an exit. Stations must operate at least 150 kilowatts per port, so it's considered fast charging. Stations must have at least 4 charging ports. In terms of the funding, projects have to have a minimum 20% match provided by third parties, and each station award will be no more than $1 million. So to deploy our first phase of charging stations, we released a request for applications in July of last year. Under the federal requirements, the request for applications was targeted at 18 areas along those alternative fuel corridors identified as having current gaps and needing potential charging stations. The request for applications then closed at the end of last October. Since then, we've been conducting thorough review of these applications, evaluating against federal requirements and our program goals. During that time, we've also been developing the award agreement documents that will be provided to awardees to ensure that these stations meet federal and state requirements. So in terms of the applications themselves that were received, this map gives you really an overview. And first, I've mentioned the alternative fuel corridors. You can see those here as the solid dark blue lines, essentially all of our interstate highways in the state. And then you have the blue circles there. Those show existing charging stations that were funded outside of this program but meet the federal requirements. So essentially, our step to fully build out this network is to fill in the gaps between those existing stations. So to do that, you can see the target areas, those cylindrical shapes along the corridors. And then you have the red dots, which show the applications themselves that were received within each target area. So an overview of the applications that we did receive. We got applicants from 25 individual applicants with a total of 128 individual sites proposed. The average total project cost was just over $1 million, and that includes that minimum 20% match that is required by the applicant. On the right, you can see an overview of the types of sites that were proposed for these charging stations. As you would expect, the majority were at fueling stations, but we also saw a decent number of applicants looking at hotels, dining, grocery, shopping centers, and a few new standalone EV charging stations. So the applications were then evaluated based on criteria from federal guidance, program goals, and industry best practices, which include the pricing, the cost of the station, the qualifications of the applicant, what amenities are offered on site, including dining, shopping, restrooms, the inclusion of on-site renewable energy, future-proofing of the stations to support future upgrades and expansions, and Federal Justice 40 requirements, which include the consideration of potential benefits to rural and disadvantaged communities. So in terms of the actual awards themselves, as I mentioned, we intend to award a project in each of our 18 target areas. These awards will go to 9 unique awardees with a total funding package of almost $11.3 million, with individual awards ranging from $292,000 to $896,000. And that range is really down to several of these stations are just upgrades to existing stations to bring them up to federal requirements, whereas others are brand new stations. And I mentioned the required match. We required a minimum of 20%, but we actually saw an average of 37% of total project costs. So we're leveraging a good bit of private funding through this program. And then on the right, similar to what we saw earlier in terms of the sites for these charging stations, again, the majority of our actual awards will be at fueling stations with a significant number of hotels and then followed by dining, grocery, shop, et cetera. So this is the same map that I showed earlier with the addition of the yellow circles there indicating the 18 awards that we are announcing today within our target areas. Another note here, the green dot there north of Harrisonburg, we are closely tracking the construction of new charging stations that has happened since the release of our request for applications. We have seen one federally compliant station come online in one of our target areas, but looking at the volume of traffic along the 81 corridor, we believe there's still sufficient demand for 2 charging stations over that significant area. So this table shows the awards themselves with the target area itself listed along the left, followed by the applicant name, the site host, the location of the station, and the district, as well as the award amount and the applicant match. And again, you see a total award of almost $11.3 million with that applicant match of $6.6 million. So in terms of what's next for this current phase 1A of the program, this meeting today represents our notice of intent to award to our applicants. This will then be followed by site assessments, MPO coordination, and other site development work, followed by the execution of grant agreements in the June timeframe and issuance of notice to proceed by July. So just a note, once we move out of this phase today, these projects will each be operating on their own timeline, but this provides a general overview of what we project. So our intent here is to take our lessons learned and our process developed through phase 1A and apply that immediately to phase 1B, which we are aiming to release next month. So the intent with phase 1B is twofold. One is looking at our interstate AFCs that I've mentioned. We see sufficient demand and sufficient traffic along those corridors to go beyond the initial station every 50 miles. So we'll be looking at infilling some of that area, looking at stations closer to every 25 miles. The second aim with phase 1B will be the awarding of around 20 stations in target areas along state highways that were designated as alternative fuel corridors at the end of last year. So I'll show those on a map here on a following slide. The intent is to close this request period in June. We will then evaluate applications based on some tweaks to our criteria that we used from phase 1A. So again, similar map to what I've shown before. The addition here is the red corridors, which are the alternative fuel corridors that were designated at the end of 2023. So these include US 17, 23, 29, and 460. So again, for phase 1B, we'll be looking at continuing to build our interstates while also filling some geographic gaps across the state. In terms of the timeline for phase 1B, this will largely follow the timeline that I outlined for phase 1A. So we're finalizing that mapping currently. We will then release the request for applications in April and then move through the process as we outlined for phase 1A, with the target of issuing notice to proceed by the end of this year. So having walked through the steps of phase 1, really our goal with phase 1 is to get to phase 2. So once all Virginia AFCs are certified as fully built out by the Federal Highway Administration, this means they have federally compliant stations at least every 50 miles. Once we reach that fully built out status, we can then apply this funding anywhere throughout the state. So our goal is to get through this phase one and then really provide that flexibility to move across the state and really build out a larger charging network. So our intent is to issue annual phase two funding opportunities that may include, again, additional stations as needed along our existing AFCs, looking at expanding to additional corridors throughout the state, but also looking at necessary upgrades and expansions of existing stations throughout the state, and looking at things like medium and heavy duty charging stations as that market evolves. And just to note, we do expect to refine phase two based on future federal guidance and requirements. Right now, states across the country are really working through phase one, so we expect more federal guidance to come as we move towards phase two in future years. And just to close out, so having walked through kind of the individual phases of the program, this slide provides an overview of the entirety of the program. So working through annual planning at the top, phase 1A and 1B in 2023 and 24. Once we achieve that fully built out, then moving to phase 2A and 2B, with the result being really the build out of a comprehensive statewide network to provide support to EV drivers across the state. That's all I have. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. Dr. Smoot?
How many ports does one charging station have?
So the federal minimum under this program is 4 ports. We expect to see, so when I spoke to future-proofing earlier, stations generally build out future-proofing to allow future expansion, so additional parking spaces, additional electric conduits. So as demand increases at a station, they can just simply go back in and add that equipment rather than having to do additional site work. So we are incentivizing that work, but right now we're building to the federal minimum of 4 ports.
If a proposal were to have more than 4 ports, would that affect the ranking of that proposal?
Would in terms of the cost. So we didn't provide an incentive in phase 1A for additional ports. It may have impacted the overall cost of the application, which was a scoring criteria.
But the $1 million is the maximum cost per station, not per port.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Laird?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Berg, who assumes the liability? Is it the applicant or the host?
So it depends. In some cases, the applicant and the host are one and the same. And it really depends on the details of the agreement that is worked out between the site host and the applicant. So once we make these awards, it'll be up to the applicant to work with their site host, if they're not the site host, to assign that liability. But it will not be VDOT. It will be either the applicant and or the site host.
And on those people, certainly on the applicants, there's one particular applicant that has 5 requests. Are we reviewing the financial stability of each applicant?
We are. That is part of the application process, is each applicant is required to provide financial assurity.
Mr. Secretary, one more question.
Yes, sir, Ms. Lee.
I view this as an opportunity for the state to excel. I mean, this is groundbreaking turf for the state to be involved in this program and directing this program. And I think about why I stop for gas, and it's to get something to eat, to use the restroom, use the facilities, or whatever it might be. So we have the opportunity to direct people throughout the state, and I find it interesting that one of the spots we have chosen, or that has been approved for an application, is a Tractor Supply. And I question, I look at a former member, Carlos, and say, would he take his BMW to a Tractor Supply to get charged up? And I've got to say, I doubt that he would, and I'm a little curious as to why we let that type of facility be allowed in the system?
So I would say that generally, as you acknowledged, this is fairly new territory for us as an agency, for us as a state. So we're really looking to the private sector. A lot of these charging station operators, they have a lot of market research that they bring to bear in terms of what are the optimal locations. And it's more than just the site host itself. It's the location, it's the grid capacity, it's EV registrations in the surrounding area. So I think a lot of that plays into these individual locations. And I would just say that it's an evolving market. So I think we don't know yet what the ideal location is. I think as the price of EVs come down, as we see more electric trucks, electric SUVs, I do think we may see more of your average Tractor Supply customer driving an electric vehicle. So I think we're really looking to that private sector, that industry expertise to see where they see the market going.
Mr. Larry, you discriminating between Walmart and Tractor Supply.
I
just wondering.
go to both.
I'm just wondering if you're discriminating there.
I go to both.
Because they got plenty of them at Walmarts. We're just trying to get a few at Tractor Supply. Okay? I'm teasing.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes, sir, Mr. Merrill.
thank you.
Mr. Coleman,
It's an
yeah.
excellent presentation. Just a couple of observations. As you look at slide 7, there were a lot of applicants in a lot of red dots in both the Richmond and the Fredericksburg district. And in the awards, there are 8 of the awards are given to Richmond and only 1 to Fredericksburg. So that's one question, is that going to be sufficient? And the second, it doesn't appear there's any reference to Lynchburg, and that's 29 is a major corridor, and I don't see any being proposed for Lynchburg. So could you comment on the rationale about why not more in
Mr.
Fredericksburg?
Berg, yeah, if you'll speak to the 50 miles and the interstates and the criteria that we're following.
Precisely. So in this initial phase, we're operating under pretty strict federal guidance to first build out our interstates to that every 50-mile requirement. So we're really kind of hamstrung in terms of where we can locate these stations. So operating within those principles, we're really trying to get that fully built out status, which will then give us flexibility to think more about, district by district, different localities, different corridors. So our goal is to really just meet those strict federal guidelines so we can then kind of take a more Virginia-specific approach, a more targeted approach.
Mr. Merrill, if you can go to page
Statewide.
14
Yes.
that Mr. Berg went over.
Yep.
That's where you'll see the 29s of the world, but we're under the guidance right now to be every 50 miles along the interstates in our first phase here, so that's what we're doing. But certainly your point's well taken. It's intended to go beyond that. And as you can see on the last page that he went through, we got $106 million, and phase 1 spends 44, 46 of that, and 60 still coming. And so as we move to those other corridors, you'll see that exactly what you're talking about.
And we will have target areas along 29. Those just have not been finalized at this time, so.
So you'll see 17, you'll see 29, you'll see 460, you'll see 58, you'll see things like that. Yes, Mr. Kaspertz.
Chris, when we first discussed this in the environmental subcommittee, we talked about the possibility of using the energy mix that the applicants were going to use as a possible evaluation criteria. Did that make it to this round of evaluations?
Not in this round. This round only focused on that on-site renewable energy or battery storage. We are still evaluating for this next round the potential to include incentives around where off-site power may be coming from. We have not finalized those criteria.
Would that be
yet.
1C
1B.
or 1D?
1B, sorry.
1B, okay,
Bravo.
so it's still a possibility for this round.
Correct.
How does that get decided, and when will that be decided?
So we're really talking a lot with our federal partners and with other states to see, how they've been able to score these things, as well as talking to industry. A lot of the feedback we got in our initial request for information from industry was that it's been a challenge just working with site hosts, a lot of our applicants not being the actual buyer of electricity for a site. There's just some complications around working with a site host where they're sourcing their power. It may be kind of out of the control of the applicant themselves. But I think there are ways, some charging station operators purchase renewable energy credits or build off-site renewable energy to offset what they charge. So we are considering the potential to award points
Good.
for that practice.
Thank you. I'll catch up with you offline on that as well. Thanks.
Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Just prior to this meeting, Chris, we had a short conversation about 58 and to the Secretary's comment about that being a part of a future plan. I was rather surprised that there's only one station applicant successful in Hampton Roads. And I know that along this corridor, it's a very important corridor for the traveling public. And I caught there's one in South Hill. Is there anything in Emporia or Suffolk or maybe to Danville along the 29 corridor that might help fill in that gap until the next round is
Mr. Coleman, I'm going to take you back to what we said. We're directed to be on the interstates every 50 miles. 58's not an interstate. That's not in phase one. It's coming. It's coming.
So,
No.
and I should also note that this map is pretty limited in the actual stations that it shows. We're just showing here stations that meet federal requirements. There are a significant number, over 1,000 stations that are not showing on this map that just may not meet these specific criteria. So there may be stations in the areas that you're discussing. They're just not meeting these specific requirements, but they're still supporting drivers.
The yellow dots, which are the proposed awards, are on interstates.
All right, well, on slide 14, then, we have 460 in there. Could you go to that?
We just went through that, Mr. Coleman. That's phase 1B. Okay, we're not in phase 1B yet. All right. Yes, sir.
Secretary, does the planning and criteria for the 50 miles on the interstate, does it take into consideration the Tesla charging stations that are deployed at numerous Wawa sheets, for
So-
example?
Currently, Tesla is in the process of opening up their network to non-Tesla drivers, which they would have to do to meet the federal requirements. So at this time, a number of Tesla stations are not meeting that requirement, but as they open up, they have just opened up their network to Ford drivers, so that would allow them to meet that requirement. So we are, in our mapping, we are tracking Tesla stations and what infrastructure they have. Also, under this federal program, you can't just have the Tesla plug. You also have to have the CCS plug, which is the previous kind of common standard plug, which is federally required. So what it would take would be for a Tesla owner or a Tesla station owner to open up to other manufacturers and also provide that additional plug, that additional CCS plug. So we are tracking that closely, and we have seen Tesla take both of those steps in some states, and we have seen Tesla apply for NEVI funding to make those upgrades.
This is new to me, and I wasn't here in the June meeting a year ago, so I do applaud the effort to get the private sector involved, because I think it makes a lot of sense when the private sector is involved. I do have a question, though. When it comes to the applicant and the host, if our money is not supplied, does that impact their ability to get the ultimate funding of the project? In other words, are we helping that project be successful, or are we feeding from the same trough of funds that they would likely get those funds without our assistance?
I think really the intent of this program, especially in phase 1B and beyond, is to go where the market has not yet gone. So I think if I were showing the network of chargers across the country, a lot of the existing network is targeted in your more higher income, densely developed areas, where I think the private sector funding would be. But what we're trying to do is build in other areas where the market isn't yet. So I think there the money really does have an impact, because the business case may not be there today, but in 2 years it may be. So we're trying to start the work now and leverage this federal funding to move the market, to support the market going in that direction.
I agree with that it makes sense. I do think the government needs to lead where the private sector will not get there, and off interstate will get you there when we start traversing that wide swath of real estate between 81 and I-85 and I-95. Your estimates, though, of the number of facilities, I think was 25 and 20 in 1B. Do you see that may be a little different? How do you arrive at 25 and 20? And it was on one of our slides here, so.
Yeah, so 25, so in terms of the interstates, the goal again.
Page 13.
Thank you. So the goal there along our interstates for the 25 is once we have that every 50 mile, just essentially going back in and filling in more closer to every 25 miles. So that's where that 25 number comes from. And then in our lower traffic state highways, in the red here, the goal there is to build closer to that 50 miles. A lot of these areas, 460 for example, much less densely populated, less trafficked than our interstates. So we're, in our initial phase here, we're just building to that every 50 mile. So every 50 miles along the red highway corridors gets us to that 20 target areas.
I would out that I'm looking at an article from 2 years ago where GM and EVgo announced a $750 billion initiative, and they're going to work with Pilot J's to bring these chargers in 50-mile increments throughout the interstate system. So to me, I probably would rather see more of these locations being in areas where the private sector is not going to get there. So I applaud the efforts, and I would really like to have input on the real estate between the interstates 81 and 85 and 95. I think that makes a lot of sense, because that's where the range anxiety comes in my mind. You're not going to have range anxiety on the interstate. I wouldn't think you'd have it now, but you will have it if you start going east and west. You're going to have it. So
that's our goal. Is
And
to
Mr.
get to the
Davis,
point.
as you know, it's an evolving landscape here as we see demand and so forth. Thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Berg. Appreciate it very much. Our next item on the agenda is our director's item. Ms. Jennifer DeBrule, DRPT.
All right,
Ma'am?
thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good morning, members of the board. You have my monthly director's report in your folder. I'm not going to go through that, but we'll draw your attention to a couple of things. We have all of our data set for the conclusion of the calendar year now, and as we shared with the Rail and Transit Subcommittee this morning, we provided 116 million transit trips in calendar year 2023. That's up from 90 million in calendar year 2022. So we're seeing a significant growth. Not every system, but many of our systems have met and exceeded their pre-pandemic ridership. We also had a banner year with our Virginia Breeze intercity bus service with a record-setting 60,000 passenger trips, and a record-setting year for Amtrak Virginia with 1.3 million riders, which is a new record for us on Amtrak Virginia and breaks our old record by 30%. So all good statistics. I give you those to say that we have a brand-new open data portal that we have just launched. We initially started our open data portal about 2 years ago. We've done a significant amount of work. We've actually brought all of it in-house, and it's done by our team at DRPT. Collaboratively across the agency, we're saving the agency about $500,000 a year in the way that we're approaching that now. Instead of using consultant resources and software products, we've built it on our own webpage using tools that we already had. So I would draw your attention to that. You can go on there and drill down in a number of metrics for each individual transit system across the Commonwealth, see ridership going back to pre-pandemic time, so you can see the trends by agency if you're interested in doing that. But that is our ongoing effort to be very transparent with our information, and so I wanted to share that with you today and give some kudos and congratulations to my team for developing that new tool. We'll be using that same platform to digitize our 6-year program going forward. We've done that with our active smart scale projects already, but we'll be adding all of our active rail and transit projects to that portal as well. It's geo-referenced, it's a GIS-based product, and so they'll be working on that through the conclusion of this calendar year to get all of that done, but it's a new resource and something that I think that will be helpful to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Burrell. Any questions for the director? All right, Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to defer my comments this month. I will have a set of comments for contracts and agreements that we've executed with our partners, whether it be the federal government or others, at next month's meeting.
Just a few things. I would tell you that it's been a very busy 3 months. It's been interesting as we've transitioned to assembly and control has changed. We've had lots of outreach and lots of work with new folks, and my staff has been extremely busy. I want to thank them for all the work that they've done. There's been a lot of late nights trying to help folks get up to speed and understand unintended consequences of legislation, and there's just been a tremendous amount of interaction by DRPT, VDOT, and the Secretary's staff, my staff as well. So I want to thank them for that. We've got about 1,000 bills that are coming to the governor, a little bit over that. A bunch of stuff that he will either sign, veto, or amend. We've got a reconvene session coming up in a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks now to consider that. The budget is still out, as you know, and so we'll see how all that goes. But we're certainly optimistic to try to get the year closed out and move into the following year. So busy time, lots of good stuff going on, lots of new legislators, and that's really important that we spend time with them so they get to know who we are, what we do, and how things work. And these folks come up here with great enthusiasm, and so many of them this year are new. So they just don't know, and they don't understand sometimes what consequences are of things. So it's been great to interact with them and to work with them and try to get us all on the same page to understand what we're trying to accomplish. So I want to thank all the agencies and all the agency heads and their staffs, particularly the people that work in legislative affairs, because it's been a really good effort, and I think we're in a great place.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, Ms. Hines.
I know how busy you all have been. Legislative session is really critical for the work that we all do. I do have a request that I'd like to put out publicly for consideration. As my husband has been so ill, it has been difficult, as you know, for me to be part of the board in the same way that I was before. At the same time, I feel a deep obligation to my region to be present in these conversations, as I would imagine every CTB member does, that our decisions are richer when we're all here. And I am aware that there is allowance in the law for virtual participation at boards like ours, but also boards of supervisors and city councils. And we have to pass a resolution in order to make that real, as you know. So I'm asking, not because I'm going to be here a lot longer, but because I think it could make the board more available to certain people. There are very clear limitations. Physical quorums have to be present. We could get some advice on how to pass such a resolution. But I think it would be a good tool for the board to have, to help when active board members can't be here because of weather, because of illness, because they broke their leg, whatever. So I just put that out as a request, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. You've been an advocate, and I appreciate that. We'll address that as we go forward. Thank you. With that, I'm going to close the workshop meeting, and I will open the action meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. The first item of the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak? All right, hearing none. We have the approval of our minutes. The minutes were distributed in your package. Is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
Ms. Hines moves, and there's a second. We've got a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you. Our first numbered item is action on the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority FY 2025 capital budget. Mr. DJ Stadler. Thank you,
Morning.
sir. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Good morning, members of the board. It's a pleasure to be here. There is a legislative requirement for each year the Commonwealth Transportation Board to approve the capital budget of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. Early in February, we distributed that budget to the CTB, so you all had it for review. You may recall at the workshop last month, I had the honor of leading the Pledge of Allegiance and then also presenting the capital budget to all of you. I'm here today looking for an approval of our FY25 capital budget.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Caspert's moves and Ms. Sellers seconds. Is there further discussion?
I just had one question, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir. Mr. Merrill.
The budget that you have for Long Bridge, is that funded completely, or do we still have a gap to fill?
Funds it completely, both the north package and the south package. On time.
Thank you to our federal partners.
Absolutely.
Anyone else? All right, we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much.
Very much.
The next item on the agenda is item number 2, action on fiscal years 24 through 29, 6-year improvement program transfers for January 20 through February 19th. Ms. Kimberly Pryor.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Mr. Secretary.
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. In your packet, you should have received a list of the monthly transfers that require your approval, as well as those that are provided for your information. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I recommend your approval.
Yates moves. Is there a second? Ms. Green seconds. The further discussion?
Sorry, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, no, it's all right, Mr. Merrill.
Sorry, there are a couple that had really substantial, I'm trying to get to the page right now, so transfers like $11 million or something like that, and another one of $12 million. I finally got to it. On page, Regional Trails balance entry for Peaks to Treat, that's the $12.7 million. Is that the discussion we had earlier that we're?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that, and then the other one was the revenue sharing balance for Salem District, the $11 million for revenue sharing local match, the transfer of $11 million.
Yes, sir. That's in accordance with your revised policy, where projects that have a shortfall for award may request additional revenue sharing funding to secure that award if they're short.
About 20% shortfall is what they had on that project.
And that's the state and local match component.
Yeah, Mr. Merrill, we tend to spend a fair amount of time outside this meeting looking at things like that, and I think what you're getting at, or some of what we're getting at, and we'll see this later in bids, is that costs just continue to go up, and so we've got these projects that are in the hopper, and they're not finished, and a couple years later, all of a sudden they need more money. And we're tracking that in terms of both our estimates and sort of how we deal with this. But we're continuing to see that, and we're hopeful that that has plateaued a bit, and that we will not see that sort of such a high rate of increase continuing. But it's troublesome. And,
Yeah, the small amounts, I get all the small amounts, under $1 million or $2 million, but we see 10, 12, $13 million, which represent
100%. 100%. So we're noticing just like you are, and we talk about it, and we're just trying to get to where we need to go. But it's definitely been a difficult environment for inflation and transportation. Thank you. Ms. Pryor, next item is item 3, action on addition of projects to the 6-year improvement program for 24 through 29.
Sure, thank you. In your packet, you should have a list of proposed amendments to the 6-year program. There are 30 projects on the list. 12 of them are safety projects, mostly related to rail safety and 2-lane rural road safety improvements. The remaining 18 are the NEVI projects that Mr. Berg just briefed you on, and I recommend your approval.
So moved.
Hans makes the motion. Mr. Merrill seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? All right, thank you. Item number 4, action on smart scale project cancellation, Route 301 sidewalk located within the Hampton Roads District. Ms. Pryor.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You recall I briefed you on 5 proposed smart-scale cancellations last month. This one in Hampton Roads District on Route 301. If you recall, there was an issue with the logical termini at application, and the locality has requested cancellation of the project, and we recommend your approval of that.
Mr. Stant makes the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Coleman seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? All right, we're going to back up because I think the chairman got distracted and started responding to Mr. Merrill, and I don't think we ever voted. I think Mr. Merrill pointed that out. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We were going. So I think we're back on, is this item number, Carol? Item number 2? Item number 2, we had a motion. Who was our motion? I think it was Mr.
Yates.
Mr. Yates.
Seconded by Ms. Green.
Exactly. So Mr. Yates made the motion, Ms. Green seconded. I apologize, folks. So we've got a motion and a second. This is on item number 2 on the action agenda. We have a motion and a second. We had some discussion. Is there any further discussion? All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Merrill. All right, we're on number 5 now. Is that right?
Yes.
We're back on track. All right, thank you very much. Item number 5, action on smart-scale project cancellation, Victory Boulevard enhancement located within Hampton Roads District. Ms. Pryor.
Thank you. You recall in my briefing last month on this project, the locality was unable to acquire the private roads necessary to fully implement the scope of this project and did request cancellation, and I recommend your approval.
Mr. Stant.
So moved.
Mr. Coleman. We have a motion and we have a second. Mr. Stant and Mr. Coleman. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item number 6, action on smart-scale project cancellation, Loudoun County Park and Ride, located within the Northern Virginia District. Ms. Pryor.
Thank you. If you recall in my presentation last month, Loudoun County requested cancellation of this project because one of the park and ride lots was proffered by a developer, and the other one, there was significant public opposition to it. There are some expenditures on the project, $470,000, which are being covered by the leverage funding on the project. The county did request cancellation, and I recommend your approval.
Moved.
Second.
Ms. Hines moves, Mr. Caspert seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item number 7, action on smart-scale project cancellation, Route 50 corridor improvements located within the Northern Virginia District. Ms. Pryor.
Thank you. This project is also in Loudoun County. The county requested cancellation of the project so that they can submit an application for a larger scale improvement in Round 6. The board's current policy prohibits the application of a project at the same location for the same need. And so they've requested cancellation, and I recommend your approval.
Moved.
Second.
Hines makes the motion, Mr. Caspert seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? All right. Action item number 8, action on smart-scale project cancellation, Lower Appomattox River Trail located within the Richmond District.
Thank you. If you recall, last month, as presented at the workshop, the applicant had difficulty securing an operator for this shuttle service to and from the trail. They've requested cancellation, and I recommend your approval.
Mr. Davis.
So moved.
Is there a second? Ms. Hines seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you. Item number 9, action on adoption of updated 6-year improvement program development and management policy. Ms. Pryor.
Thank you. Last month, I briefed the board on a proposed revision to the board's 6-year improvement program development policy, mostly to clean up old code references, add new funding programs enacted since the policy was originally adopted, and just to add some background information to the policy and some organizational changes. In your packet this month, you should have gotten an expanded summary of the changes in the policy to include links for each individual funding program and code references to help in your review of the document. There were also some very minor tweaks to the draft policy that was provided to you last month to add things like acronyms and clarify some of the code references. So with that, I'd take any questions or recommend your approval.
Thank you, Ms. Hines, for
So
all
moved.
that. Hold on a second. I want to thank Ms. Hines because she's the one.
Sellers sent comments too. We both did.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm getting there. And she's jumped in here anyway, but I want to thank you all for doing that. Mr. Kasperitz made the motion. Ms. Sellers made the second, and thank you for your comments as well. And yes, ma'am, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank Mrs. Pryor for taking the time. I think this reads very well, and it's a lot of work that went in here, and as a newer member, it's very helpful to have all of this in one place. I know it's very, very easy to read. Thank you.
So we have a motion and we have a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Yeah, Ms. Sellers and Ms. Hines, I'm hoping we're still using this, but when I came on this board originally, I was overwhelmed by acronyms. And I had, it was months and months of acronyms. And, you hate to stop everything and ask every time. And we finally produced a document of acronyms. And I hope we're still giving that out to members. If we aren't, we should be. But it's in the handbook, I think. But this is hard stuff when you come to it new. And there's just a lot to know and a lot to understand. So appreciate your help in that regard. Thank you, Ms. Pryor. Mr. Swanson. Action item number 10, action on location decision review for the Southeastern Parkway and the Greenbelt. Yes, sir.
Yes, good morning.
Welcome. Good morning.
Members of the board. You have before you a resolution to rescind the existing location decision for the Southeastern Parkway and Greenbelt in the Hampton Roads District. The board issued this resolution in November of 2005. The rationale to rescind the decision is based on the information reviewed during the workshop that was held last month in February, which included the fact that there's no current funding allocated or identified to implement the project. And we also discussed at the workshop any efforts to advance the project at the current location would require a reevaluation of NEPA, including demonstration of fiscal constraint and public involvement. And therefore, I recommend your rescission of the resolution.
Mr. Stant. Mr. Coleman. We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? I'll tell you, folks, just to say it, this is like a 30-year-old deal here. And I was a much younger person, Mr. Kasperitz, talking about going back. It's interesting, we've been talking about this in Hampton Roads for 30 years. And it's had a pin in it, basically, but now we're just going to let it move on the way it needs to. So I appreciate y'all's help. Mr. Stant.
It's right up there with 460.
Mr. Stant. All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? Since I opened that door, I'm closing it. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. No further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Appreciate it. Mr. Todd. Item number 11, action on Rail Industrial Access Program update.
Morning.
Good morning, sir. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm doing well. How
Great.
are you?
Great, thank you.
Members of the board, I have a resolution to increase the
per project maximum for the Rail Industrial Access Program from $450,000 to $750,000. I have one note that you'll notice there's an attachment that includes all of the rail industrial access policies. In that way, we can replace essentially the existing policies that are in the handbook with this one and streamline the handbook. In that regard, I recommend approval.
We're all about streamlining. Ms. Green. So moved. Ms. Green moves.
Second.
Second.
Who wants to own that one? You need it? You want it? Yes, sir. You got it. You got it. He's on the board today. Mr. Folks, thank you, sir. We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank
sir. Item number 12, bids. Mr. Coker.
Morning, sir.
You'll
How are you?
recall that, welcome. Thank you for being here. Just a few minutes ago, we were talking, Mr. Merrill, about those big transfers and sort of costs and so forth. And we spent a lot of time, I just want to let you know, with Mr. Coker in our prep meetings to talk about sort of where we are with bids, and the chief engineer was involved in that. And we're starting to inch towards more bids are out of the range than we like. And, so we're looking at that closely. Commissioner's looking at that closely with the chief engineer to start to think whether we need to bake in some of this that we're seeing. A lot of it's on paving projects and other things, but in any case, just know that when we go through these, and you're going to see a number of them that are out of the range, that we've taken great note of that, and we're having lots of discussion about it. Because at the end of the day, some of the work that was done before, Mr. Kasperitz and Mr. Malvin and Mr. Williams, I think, involved in it. Maybe it was just you. But in any case, a bunch of people were in it and talked about it for months and years. And I was one of those folks. And some folks got together and tightened up our system, made it better working with the staff. But we're seeing a lot. We're seeing a fair amount of awards start to step out of that. And whenever we see that in, too much, it makes us uneasy about our estimating. So just understand that. We're on it. We're looking at it, making sure we're in a good place, and Ben's doing a great job in that regard. So, Mr. Coker, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Secretary, members of the board, I have 5 projects in excess of $5 million for your consideration. First up is Order 534 in the Hampton Roads District. This is a 2024 plant mix project on the interstate in York County. We received 2 bids. The low bidder was Allen Myers at $5.2 million. This does exceed the range. However, this is the second advertisement. We had the same 2 bidders as last time, and this low bid is 26 below the next bidder. So we consider this a good market value, and we recommend award.
Stamp moves, Mr. Coleman seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Order number 247, Mr. Coker.
Order 247 in the Salem District. This is a State of Good Repair 2024 plant mix project on the primary systems in Patrick and Henry counties. We received a single bid from APAC Atlantic for $11.8 million. This does exceed the range. However, this is the second advertisement. It was the same single bidder as last time, and this project is located in a part of the district with minimal contractors. So we feel this is the market value, and we're recommending award.
Do I have a motion to approve?
Mr. Secretary, I've discussed this with the district engineer, and I recommend approval. Move approval.
Mr. Laird seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Order number 443, Richmond. Mr. Coker.
Order 443 in the Richmond District. This is a 2024 plant mix project on the primary and secondary systems in multiple counties. We received 2 bids. Low bidder was Branscombe at $11.3 million. This does exceed the range. However, again, this is a second advertisement. The low bidder was a single bid last time, and this low bid is 12% from the next bidder, so we feel this is good market value, and we recommend award.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved, and likewise with Dr. Smoot, I broached this topic with our resident engineer on Friday, and this does exceed the cost estimate, but given the number of bids in the process, it is what it is. I would note during that conversation that we talked a lot about CVTA funds being a subset in the 9 localities of my 15 locality district, and we think that there may be some sort of demand that is being increased by the amount of dollars getting spent, and so we may be seeing some pricing reflective of so much money getting put to work. Just as a comment, but I move to approve.
Sellers seconds. Ms. Davis moves. Ms. Sellers seconds. Let me say this, Ms. Davis. We had a lot of discussion about that as well. And, you know, we've been talking about that for a few years here. Between the COVID impact and then the IIJA money in construction, you know, and you know, that concerns us in smart scale, it concerns us here. And we're having a fair amount of conversation about making sure we don't drive our own prices up. And sort of how to sort of deal with that. And there's some contracting methods that might be something we might turn to in the future, different kinds of contract. I was a government contractor for a numbers of years, and, you know, there's different methods to get to the same place, and so we may see opportunities for that or not. But in any case, we're fully aware and concerned that we not drive our own cost by flooding the market with too much demand at one time.
I can appreciate that, and I certainly don't want to disparage the folks at CVTA I sit on that board, but
No, I
maybe
mean,
there's
it's
a
just-
coordination of efforts here where we could balance and get the best result for the taxpayers.
I have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Order number K32, Culpeper.
Order
Mr. Coker.
K32 in the Culpeper District. This is a smart scale project, roadway improvements in Fauquier County. We received 3 bids. The low bidder was General Excavation for $11.4 million. This does exceed the range. Once again, this is a second advertisement. General X was the low bid last time, and the difference between the next bidder is 0.04%. So we feel this is a good market value, and we're recommending award.
Myers moves. Ms. Sellers seconds. I think you went first. All in favor, excuse me, is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Order number DB 124 in the Fredericksburg District.
Order DB 124 in the Fredericksburg District. This is a state of good repair bridge bundle design build project in multiple counties. We received 3 bids. The low bidder was Kokosing Construction Company for $33.2 million, and this one is within the range. I recommend approval.
Second.
Ms. Sellers moves, Ms. Hines seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you, Mr. Coker.
Thank you, sir.
We had a short meeting today, but a good meeting. Carol says our lunch is ready. And so with that, I'm adjourning this meeting, and we're gonna adjourn to lunch.